If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, people who have had terrifying encounters with unknown or otherworldly beings in deep forests or the woods, what was it? I used to work for a company that ran a backpacking program not far west of Skinwalker Ranch. It was my first night acting solo as an emergency response for the groups in case something happened. Like they need an emergency medical evacuation or batteries for their communications. This position was known as Unit 0, and as was put in place solely to have reasonable response times in a remote area in the Utah desert. I find a nice field to park the truck in, set up my sleeping bag, turn up my walkie-talkie, and soon enough I was asleep. It didn't seem like I was asleep for long when I woke up suddenly to the sound of broken communication on the radio from one of the groups. I groggily sit up, grab the radio, and hold it up, waiting for another call out to confirm if the group was asking for us. I glance out the back window of the truck and see a tall, all-black, human-like figure dash across the field behind me. Faster than any human should be able to run. It scared me so bad that I quickly dove back into my sleeping bag. Still no word from the radio. I collect myself and call out to all groups, "This is us, did someone radio out for me?" All groups confirm they have not used the radio line in a while. Needless to say, I got into the front of the truck and sped away to sleep with the nearest group of hikers a few miles away. So me, female, 19, and my stepsister, 18, grew up together for a long period of time, starting from 8 to today. When we were younger, we used to camp in New Hampshire at the Rumney Pines Christian Campground, where our families owned a few campers and a cabin. This happened about 10 years ago, maybe a little less. One night during the summer, at around 7 p.m., my stepsister and I were messing around in our grandparents' camper when it was about time to go back to our parents' camper for bed. We get outside, and the way that the campers are situated, they are perpendicular to the road in a line. At the end of the line of trailers, there's a path that continues to a bunch of old and some renovated campgrounds that were used during the summer, as well as the second pool. It's all dirt and mud on the road, and the trees are plentiful. We were walking from where the main road was towards deeper in the woods to get to our parents' camper. When we started walking, I quickly saw something far in the trees making slight movement, and so I stopped walking. Strangely enough, my stepsister stopped walking too at the exact same time, and we both said to each other, "Do you see that?" All the way at the end of the line of campers towards the left of the road leading into the woods, we saw maybe a 7-8 foot tall being with its head and shoulder poke out around one of the trees to look at us, stare for a couple of seconds, then slowly move back behind the tree again. It was really tall, kind of skinny, with long proportioned arms, at least its left arm. It was silver/gray with a big round head and short set shoulders. Needless to say, we both ran yard. I was walking behind my brother by about 10 to 20 feet. I looked to my right and saw a white, almost cartoon-looking hand waving from side to side at me. I tried yelling out to my brother to have a look at it, but it was like I couldn't speak, no sound would come out. I think about this so often that I wish there was a way to make my brain remember it more clearly. I do remember telling my parents I saw Mickey Mouse's hand waving at me in the woods because, to a 4-year-old me, every cartoon was Mickey Mouse, I guess. It had longer, thinner hands in reality but was bright white. Years later, probably pre-teenage, my dad was watching something about aliens or UFOs, and I can remember something that made me think back on that incident. I've been interested in the topic since. Anyway, I've always wanted to share this story to see if anyone had any thoughts or similar experiences. Many years ago, I used to live in a home in rural NC in the southern Piedmont region, close to the foothills. Despite it being a rural town, we did live off of a major highway that connected to nearby cities and larger towns. A lot of weird stuff happened here. Right as we moved in, everything was fine. There were some normal issues that you find in old rental homes, but nothing out of the ordinary. I will add that my father, who I no longer have contact with for many reasons, is obsessed with the paranormal and tends to embellish his spooky stories, but some things were there that could not be explained. Around our second year in the house, our woods became weird. We lived next to a horse pasture, but behind our home next to it was just a long stretch of wood. That summer, at the same time every dusk, all of the birds and tree frogs would go dead silent. Moments later, there was a loud bellowing sound from the woods that sounded like a man moaning in severe pain, though it did not sound entirely like a real man. It was super loud and terrifying. No sounds begging for help or words of any kind, just the moaning. One night, a friend of my dad's came by. He has hunted his entire life, rode horses, and could make every bird call with his own hands and mouth. He knew just about what every animal in the area sounded like. He heard this story and confidently believed he knew what it might be. It happened. The woods went silent, and the moaning started again. My dad's friend went pale as a ghost and stammered out, "I have no idea what that is." Soon after, he practically ran out and left, and he never came back. This wasn't the only paranormal thing about this house. I've had my fair share of odd sightings. I woke up one morning and looked for my mom. I went out the front door thinking she may be outside, and I briefly saw the back of her walk to the backyard in her simple blue southern shirt. To save time, I walked back through the rest of the house to the kitchen, where the back door was to find her washing dishes, but in her orange, simply southern shirt. She had not changed. Was this a mimic in our woods? A good old flesh pedestrian? Or is there an animal that this could have been? Please feel free to ask any questions. By far my scariest experience in my life. So I was walking my brother's dog, her, and because of the fires, the outside was all smoky and the sky was kind of orangish. This is in Oregon, BTW. Anyway, I was walking her so she could go to the restroom and stuff, but when I was going to throw away her poop, there was this trail. It was just all pitch black, and I saw a shadowy figure kind of like a man, and it kind of just stood there a bit. I obviously got hella creeped out and started booking it back to my brother's using his telescope for the first time. And for context, we had built a fort in the woods a little while back. While he was using said telescope, he heard little girls screaming and laughing at the same time, yelling and laughing, "Help, help me." Ever since, we have stayed out of the woods unless we are in a vehicle or with someone who has a gun. The direction it was coming in was really close, and just about a mile that could be easily walked behind it was an old abandoned house. I hope you take this information seriously and never go to hear sounds in the woods or in the woods by yourself. Also, where we live, we have terrible Wi-Fi and cellular. So if anything were to happen out there, we would be screwed. So rule of thumb, use your brain, we all have one. I work a night shift, so staying up throughout the night is normal on my days off. About 2ish in the morning, I let my dogs out, and I let one run and kept the other on the leash because she loves to run after nothing, literally. My leashed dog starts to snarl at the tree line that is about 30 yards out from me, and I notice something very large moving awkwardly into the tree line and moving into the woods. It was walking with a heavy rock side by side, moving very slowly. I own horses that are fenced in, and this was happening outside of their fenced in area. So I know it wasn't any of them. This thing was looking as big as my horses, so I was confused. We do have deer that like to nest or settle overnight inside the fence with their younglings because the horses ward off some predators like coyotes and such. I walked to my house to grab the flashlight, and of course I shined the light and nothing. I never heard a single crack, snap, or nothing while I saw it, and after it was gone. My son said this afternoon he saw something at 1230 last night and said one of the horses was out, but after checking all the horses, he said it must have been the biggest deer he has ever seen. Now he lives in a different house, but further away on the property, about 3x the distance I am. I scare deer away every night before I let the dogs out so I don't have to chase them in the middle of the night through the woods. This was no deer. My wife believes it to be the spirit of one of our horses we had to put down last week. In the past, we both have had our share of weird instances at that wood line, but this for me took the cake. The scary thing is that we are planning to build our future home right in that area. One day, probably around 5 to 6 years ago, I was in the final years of elementary school and around 14 to 15 years old, and me and a few of my friends went to this sort of lake a few kilometers away from our town or village. We rode on bikes. It usually took us around 25 minutes to get to the water, and to get there, you had to go through this road that was crossing a local ranch or farm. Me and my best friend went ahead of the group because we were faster and decided we'd wait for the rest at the crossroads of the ranch and 2 roads leading to the woods. We stopped at the crossroads, looked around for a few moments, and when we looked at the direction of the road leading deep into the woods, we saw something. I got shocked, my heart ached from the eeriness I'd felt. I saw a creature that looked like a large black horse head with a sort of black cloak, and after a few seconds, the creature disappeared. After all the years, I can't remember if it just vanished in the blink of an eye or ran away. But when we looked back at each other to make sure if the other one saw it as well, we both were scared as duck and confirmed we both saw it. We decided to go further to look at the road where the creature was because the road was kind of on a hill, so we didn't see behind it too much because it went right down after a few meters. It was gone, nowhere to be seen, so it completely erased the possibility that it was just a horse from the ranch. Even though we knew it looked nothing like a regular horse. When the others caught up, we didn't say anything because no one would believe us, or maybe we did. I don't remember much after that, and then I almost forgot about this whole incident until a few months ago, when I saw some TikToks with my girlfriend about skinwalkers and wendigos. When I remembered that day and the creature, I instantly started to freak out on the inside. Could that creature be something like that? I looked up the fact that the Wendigos are in Indian mythology, and they probably aren't in Europe, Central or Eastern. What was that, then? Today I reunited with a few of my friends from elementary school and with my old best friend, and I brought this up to see if he still remembers. He said he does. A black, horse-headed giant thing. I got the chills because I realized it really did happen back then, and I have a witness. So I decided to finally address this thing. If you have any idea what this could be, I would appreciate any help. A few days ago, I traded 2 of my kayaks for a nice canoe. I took it out on the river for the first time yesterday morning. I was alone, and I had every intention of paddling about 4 miles upstream to the campground where we were staying. I started around 7 a.m. Either way, about 2 miles deep, something on shore caught my eye, and I knew exactly where to look, only I couldn't see anything, although I did think I saw a shape sort of resembling a man crouched down on the side of a tree at its base. But the closer I looked, the more I realized the shape wasn't a man at all, it was nothing. I was convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. Shortly after, I got spooked to the point where I wanted to just get the hell off the river. I realized it was shorter just to turn back around and go back to my vehicle at the boat launch. That's what I did. As I paddled past the point where I thought I saw a man, I looked over, and what I saw was so strange that I was pretty unaffected by it. I can't describe my calmness. It was almost some sort of rite of passage or knowledge suddenly gained and accepted. There was the shape of a man, a large man or being, distorted right at the edge of the shoreline in front of many trees down the river's steep banks. All I can compare it to is a predator, but only in the sense that I was seeing an outline of a shape that was clearly invisible or camouflaged. In Predator, when the predator is invisible or camouflaged, 3-dimensional features of his body are slightly visible by the bending of the light. I saw no features on this body except for its outline. It was undeniable. I looked to the other shoreline, half expecting to see another being, a man, or whatever this human-like shape was. I was wrong. The shoreline was calm and peaceful, undisturbed. In a desperate effort to debunk what I had just seen, I looked back to the opposite bank, where the shape had been, expecting it to be gone and allowing myself to be much more at peace with this river. It was still there. Its right arm was now positioned motionless, as if it were waving at me. I don't think it was waving or taunting me. Comparing it to a wave is the best way to describe the position. I became pretty spooked again and just looked away. I paddled hard, and I didn't look back. It was strange because I knew whatever was on that shoreline was watching me as I paddled away. I'm pretty sure this thing scared me out of the woods 15 years ago. Can someone help me understand what this thing is and why there's a possibility it might be watching me? Also, I'm pretty sure this is relevant. Both times I believe I encountered this thing were near rivers. Different rivers in the same town. Someone, please help me figure this out. A few years ago, we had a big church camping trip. It was on one of those 100-person campsites you need to reserve a year in advance that's pretty isolated out. Anyway, I'm up pretty late, chatting before finally calling it a night. It was around 1 a.m., and only 3 other people were still up, my friend and 2 older gentlemen who were still talking away. I go to my tent and fall asleep almost instantly. Anyway, I wake up in the morning, and here's the story I hear. Apparently, about 15 minutes after I fell asleep, my friend heard screams that sounded like help. Everyone else quieted down, and they too heard what sounded like distant yelling, although they couldn't make out what. They took a light and made a quick 5-minute walk in the direction of the sound, but nothing happened. My friend swears it sounded like someone screaming for help. It's possible, but I don't know how likely it is. The main road was about 20 minutes away, and the only way to our campsite was a single road. There was no reason to be anywhere near our site unless you were camping there. No attractions, rivers, etc. Even for hunting, you would be better off going deeper and further out. The next night, we stood up again, but this time nothing. I work at a summer camp in northern Canada. Between times when kids are coming to camp, one person is scheduled to watch over the camp to make sure that nothing gets stolen or damaged. Not that that would happen. The only thieves at night would be bears. Northern Canada is an isolated place. Not much for civilization. Anyway, I was scheduled to watch over the camp for a week. And this is a large camp. 4 kilometers wide, 6 kilometers long. The buildings and the sites with the canvas tents are scattered far apart, so it's a tedious job to do your rounds, as it takes about an hour to check in on every building. One night, after I was done doing my rounds, I was exhausted. I wanted to go to sleep, so I climbed into my bed in the staff cabin. It was a stormy night, and I was glad that I was in the warmth of the building and not still outside. I drifted off to sleep quickly. Soon after I fell asleep, something woke me up. I was cold, and my head hurt. I felt around with my eyes closed, still half asleep. I felt mud. Wet and gritty. I opened my eyes, instantly sobered by the feeling of the ground. I bolted upright and saw that I was in front of the mess hall, about a 10-minute walk from the staff cabin. I rubbed my forehead and realized that I had been sleepwalking. I do it often enough at home, but I never do it in places other than home. But I was too tired to think about that, and I stood up. I was about to go and walk back to the cabin and change into a clean and dry outfit when I saw something that made me freeze where I stood. Across the mess hall, there is a sports field. And on the sports field, I saw about 24 figures running back and forth in the pouring rain, as if they were playing a game of soccer. I stared at them, squinting, trying to make out the distinguishing features of human beings. But they were only black figures, blurry in the night. I stood there, just staring, when one of them noticed me. It called its fellow figures to it, and then it pointed right at me. Then they started running towards me, inhumanly fast. Then I blacked out. I woke up again, this time on a path that I soon figured out, after a couple minutes of disorientation, led to the parking lot. Then it occurred to me. The parking lot. I raced up the path, fumbling to get the keys out of my pocket as I ran. I got to my white car, which stood out like a light in the stormy night. I was shaking, so it was difficult for me to get my key into the ignition. But then I started my car and adjusted my rearview mirror. But, in the mirror, there was the dark figure, blocking my view. I screamed and bolted out of my car. But, just like the last time, my feet felt like they were cemented into the ground. There were other cars in the parking lot. And in each of those cars, there were 1 or 2 figures. They opened the car doors and stepped out, turning to face me. I wanted to scream, but I was forced to watch these things move jaggedly and slowly towards me, with purpose. I willed my brain and begged it to let me move. Then, as soon as the figures were about to descend upon me, my legs could suddenly move. I ran as fast as I could to the only place where I could find sanctuary. The chapel. I threw open the double doors and then locked them behind me. I got down on my knees in front of the altar, and I prayed. I prayed like I had never prayed before. I begged God to make these demonic figures leave me alone. As I was doing this, there was banging on the door, and my prayers became more desperate as the banging got louder and louder. And then, finally, it stopped. I cried with relief and thanked the Lord for saving my life. But, as soon as I felt I was finally safe, I heard a different kind of banging. Muffled and rhythmic one. Banging on what sounded like glass. I looked around the one-room chapel and was terrified when I saw a hand. A single hand was drumming on the stained glass window. I started crying again as more and more hands began slamming against the windows. Until they broke. And I blacked out. I awoke in bed. I opened my eyes, looked around, and realized that it was morning. I smiled, thinking to myself that it was just a dream. I ran my fingers through my hair nervously. Only to feel that it was wet. Then I looked down, and my clothing was covered in mud. Last night I was bored and decided to step outside to do a bit of stargazing, as the front and back of my property are particularly good areas as there are no trees. However, I am surrounded by woods, but just imagine a giant circle free of any trees and a perfectly clear night sky. I had been outside for around 15 minutes when I decided to head in, as I was getting anxious and picking up on something that just seemed off. I have physically seen a crawler right near here too, so I wanted to play it safe and just head back in. As I went to turn around and head back inside, I glanced up and saw a big, fire-orange ball of light, energy, or something. All I knew was that it wasn't a physical object. This ball of light was literally no more than 40 feet in the air, hovering completely silent, and as soon as I directed my attention to it, it began to slowly move forward, zigzag, do one full circle maneuver, and then dematerialize directly in front of my eyes. Within a minute, it essentially disappeared into itself. It was really cool to be able to see this, and it got me wondering if what I saw is what the pilots of World War II used to call Foo Fighters, and if somehow my anxious thoughts about the crawler were related to this thing's arrival or if it was a coincidence. In 1999, I was 7 years old, playing in the woods with my friend Charlotte. We were standing at each end of a big log in the woods when I noticed movement in my peripherals. I tried focusing my periphery to catch a detailed look. I see similar movement often when we're in the woods, and it always disappears, more like scatters, before I turn to look. My heart skipped a beat when I could make out a group of little people looking up at me as well. I was frozen in the pose I was playing in, and after a few seconds, I realized Charlotte had stopped narrating the play and was frozen in place as well, staring at me but focusing on them. I'm pretty sure they were dressed because it didn't look like they were all naked. I could tell they knew we were aware of them, and they dispersed as Charlotte moved her eyes. We didn't talk about it until we were in her house. We weren't afraid, just confused on our walk home. We wrote out what we saw before talking about it, to see if we saw the same thing. Unfortunately, both our descriptions were so vague, but clothed, less than a foot, for sure. One thing we were positive of was to mind our business and not go searching, which is what our instinct would have usually been. We thought we had found a colony of little people in the woods. But the fact that our reaction was to quietly leave and not even talk about it until behind closed doors, and still not even talk out loud but write it. I don't remember being too frightened. In fact, we kind of just accepted it and moved on with a new taste of what this world and universe are capable of. I watched The Indian in the Cupboard later in life, which reminded me of these little people, but I no longer saw them by then. Charlotte and I would talk about seeing things out of the corner of our eyes, but we could never figure out what they were. Although Charlotte was different, she and her dad were huge hippies, tire swing in the kitchen, no TV, and her imagination was so wildly magnificent that it made my mind radiate. I always thought that maybe her narration of our play was so powerful and energetic that we could manifest and see the same thing. Little people were never playing any part in either of our imaginations. In fact, when we both confirmed what each other saw, we were kind of in awe that we've never even dreamt of tiny people in this universe. When I was a student, over 30 years ago, I decided to spend several weeks climbing Munros in Scotland. After summiting Ben Macdui, I stopped to cook lunch and was aware of the hairs standing up on the back of my neck and a sensation of someone standing very close right behind me. I did the spin around and called out hello, but there was no one there but me. I felt very uneasy and kept looking around. There was a spectacular view in all directions for miles, but I couldn't see another soul. After packing up, I started down a very long gradient rock field to the east. As I was walking, I started to hear footsteps to my right. I thought it was just the echo off the rocks of my own steps, and I playfully stopped every 20 or so steps just to hear them stop. Now, I'm not easily scared, and I was a very fit rugger player standing at 6 feet 5 inches, but what happened next started to really give me the willies. The footsteps started to sound as though they were circling me as I walked, and after a few minutes of this, I could have sworn that I heard breathing. I was completely at a loss to explain the noises and assumed it was still the echo. After several more minutes, I started to hear the stones being disturbed, as though someone were walking upon them. They were off to the side of me and were not affected by me at all. Even when I stopped to listen, I could now hear the stones moving. I increased my pace, and after another 20 minutes of unceasing sound, they stopped. I thought I'd just scared myself and imagined it, but some time later I mentioned it to a friend who told me of the strange goings-on of Ben Macdui. If he had never told me, I would never have known and would have long forgotten those events. Just sitting here typing it out has repeatedly brought the hairs on my neck and arms to attention. I work on an oil rig. My job is to run an excavator, mix off the mud that comes out of the ground, and do stuff that needs a big machine. Because of the locations of these rigs, I have to drive to pretty remote places in the wilderness of Canada. Anyhow, one of the light towers at the edge of the lease went out. I went over, and in the forest, I could see these weird, like firefly type things, but they were like the size of a basketball, but they weren't bright, like they weren't lighting things up around them. Then I started feeling super uneasy, and in between some trees, I could see this big-ass silhouette of a person with glowing red eyes. I ran back into the machine just to see it walking away. When I was in it, I ended up telling the crew that I'm not the only one who's seen it. Like, half of them have seen it, and 2 of them have had it. About 5 years ago, my family and I lived in a rural area in western North Carolina. Our house was situated on the side of a mountain and had a long gravel driveway that cut between thick wooded areas on either side. As the driveway approached the house, the woods opened up a bit to a cleared area with more gravel, and then finally up to the house and a small front yard that overlooked the drive. One morning, I got up early, 4 a.m., to let my then 8-month-old puppy out for her morning constitutional. We had floodlights mounted by the front door that illuminated the entire front yard as well as a good portion of the driveway. I turned those on, and out the door we went. While my dog is nosing around to my right, I am gazing straight ahead and notice some movement in the woods to my left. I turned sharply and watched a gargantuan black shadow, about 3 meters in height, sweep out of the woods. It moved across the drive and through the cleared gravel area, a distance of about 200 meters, in a matter of seconds. As it reached the adjacent wood line, but before it disappeared, my dog saw it, bristled, and barked like a crazy puppy. She's a border collie, so I was terrified that she was going to give chase. Thankfully, she wanted nothing to do with it. This thing acted as though we weren't even there. Could not have cared less. I was stunned. What the hell did we just see? This thing stood taller and moved faster than any being I have ever seen. It moved using what looked like a stride but made no sound as it walked over the gravel. It was blacker than black. It looked like a massive, cloaked shadow. I tried every scenario I could conceive of to replicate it, to no avail. It still messes with me. Has anyone else seen one of these things? Are they always so brazen? I saw this dark shadow figure in the woods. It was all black, like a shadow, but I could tell it wasn't just a shadow. It was almost solid. It was tall and had the figure of a man, and it was followed directly by the most unsettling feeling I've ever gotten. I was driving to school, so my headlights hit him, and then he was gone. Nothing was there. Fast forward a couple of days, I hadn't thought much about it, but my mood had dropped severely over the week. I'm usually a total optimist and always have so much energy, and I didn't know why. I was always upset and tired all the time. Then I was in a public bathroom, but nobody was in there but me. I'm sitting in the stall when the sink suddenly turns on. It was one of those motion sensor sinks. I was still the only one in the bathroom, and I was in the stall, though. The second I opened the stall door to check, it stopped. I texted my friend, who knows a lot about ghosts, and told her I thought I was being haunted, and she said I might have an attachment. Without telling her about my mood dropping, she says it can cause the mood to drop and for somebody to get tired. It's all connected, and I'm not sure what to do. Back in 2018 to 2019, I was outside my house with my little brother, keeping him entertained while my family was out. I don't remember exactly what we were doing. All of a sudden, I just had this feeling that we were being watched. I looked past my brother into the wooded area in front of my house. In the ditch, right before the wooded area, I see a figure of a head pop up. It had a head of a fox or a cat, ear pointed up, white fur, black eyes, ears were white with the tips being black. As soon as I locked eyes with it, it shot down. Originally, I was going to go look in the ditch, but something was screaming at me not to. About 20 minutes go by, and my back is facing the woods, and my brother is facing the woods. We got into some conversation when he just stopped mid-sentence and looked over at me in shock and confusion. I look back, and we just see a black figure run into the woods. We just stared into the woods. I then got an idea and told my brother to go inside and grab one of our flashlights. It's one of those that you can adjust the distance with, and that's bright enough to even light up a room, whether it's daytime or completely dark. It's like you just turned on a light in a room. He goes and grabs it and hands it to me. When I shined it on the woods, just slowly searching for something, I stopped near the right corner of the woods, and it was just white eyes looking back. We were just stunned looking at this thing, and then I realized something. Our house is on a hill, but the woods aren't. Whatever is looking at us is standing on equal footing with the hill to look at us. The eyes kept looking at us, then to the side, and then they would sway left to right. We were watching it and clicking off the flashlight to wait for 5 to 10 minutes to see if it would leave. But it wouldn't. We didn't have our phones with us to take a photo or video. It never crossed our minds. We stood there until it got dark, which was almost 2 hours. The figure is just looking at us, occasionally moving left or right. My brother ran inside, said he had an idea, grabbed a BB gun, took aim, and shot at it. The eyes just looked down and slowly back up. He took the flashlight light and told me to try to scare it off. Again, I aimed and shot where the eyes were, but nothing happened. The eyes moved like they turned around and slowly turned back to us. 30 minutes went by, and we still did the same routine. Turn off the light, wait a minute or two, and turn it back on. The eyes still just stared at us, swaying. Then my grandfather came home, and we tried desperately to show him what we were seeing, but it was gone. We tried telling him what we saw, and he kept telling us it was a raccoon. We kept trying to tell him that it wasn't, it had to be something else. He just snapped at us and yelled, "It's a raccoon," and did not ask or talk about it again. Shortly after telling him about this, we moved out of the blue without warning. Before we officially moved, my grandfather just stared into the woods, shook his head, and looked up. I have no idea what I saw, and I have a feeling my grandfather knew exactly what we saw but never wanted to tell us. These are all true stories from people in my area that I've heard over the years, and one of them was from when I was a kid. My story. I live in a tiny town in northern BC. We are surrounded by a lot of untouched forests and beautiful rivers. My family lives out in the country, and we are about 10 minutes away from an uninhabited valley. It had an old road going through it from ages ago, and it had an old pioneer homestead that we could make our way down to. I think some loser kids burned this down around 2000-2001. Even from a young age, I hated going to this place with my family. I had no reason to despise it so much. Everyone that visited was always in awe of how beautiful it was down there, but I always just got this sick feeling in my stomach. My sighting was from when I was very young, so I realize not many will believe it, but it stuck with me. My family was showing a cousin from Australia this years ago. He told us of a night he watched what he thought was a helicopter coming in to land in the large field below his home. Right as it looked like it was landing, it shot straight up and disappeared into the sky. He's a pretty serious guy, and he told this in front of my parents, so I doubt he'd lie. He's convinced he witnessed a UFO. Sister's sighting. My younger sister was driving home on our country road after a late shift. She remembered seeing two dark people, no reflective clothing or anything, walking in the pitch black and thinking, "Wow, idiots," just as one of these things turned and glanced at her. She told me it had a green eye shine, which she knew humans shouldn't have, yet it was a human-like shape. She glanced quickly at her clock, then backed up, and whatever she was seeing had disappeared. Kentucky, Kenton County. December 2013, I used to work about 30 miles away from where I live. One night, I was stuck in heavy traffic, coming home. I take Lasix, so after a while, I really had to go to the bathroom. I kept telling myself that I was almost home and tried to hold it until I got there. By the time I got to my exit, I knew I wasn't going to make it to my house, so I pulled up to an area where Fidelity Investments is located and found an area that was isolated. This area is heavily wooded, with walking trails and a lot of game, but it is also in a very populated area. I pulled up a little side drive off one of the main roads. That little drive is about 100 feet long, with only room for one car. It went up in elevation and had bushes on the right side, facing the main road. On the left side, there was a guardrail and a view of the valley below. The area up there is huge and isolated, with several buildings that are all spaced out. The place is dark at night because there are intermittent street lights up there. At night, it's pretty deserted, too. A few cars go through that area, though, because it's a shortcut people use to go from Taylor Mill over to the 3 Liters Highway, where there are stores, restaurants, etc. When you're up there, you're above everything around this area. When I stopped, I got out of my car, waited a moment, and looked around to make sure there were no other cars. It was winter, so the bushes between where I was and the road below me didn't have many leaves on them. Because of that, you could see right through them. I was up on this little rise, about 20 or 30 feet above the drive, which was 4 lanes wide. To the left of me was a street light and more woods that went down another hill to the main road. I went to the back of my car and did what I had to do. When I finished, I stood up, and all at once, every hair on my body stood up. I knew I wasn't alone. I scanned the area in front of me and must have heard something behind me because I turned around and there were 3 deer standing there, all huddled up together, between my car and the guardrail. They weren't looking at me. They were looking across the road. I looked back over there, and that was when I saw a figure standing between the bushes in front of it and the tree line behind it. It was huge. I stand 5 feet 5 inches. Some of those bushes were about 6 feet tall, but they only came up to about the collarbone area on this thing. Due to the street light to the right of it, about 20 feet away, I was able to get a pretty clean outline of this thing. It had a large, dog-shaped head and pointed ears. I couldn't make out its neck, but I could make out its massive shoulders. That's when it growled. It was a deep vibration I could feel in my chest. My body just took over at that point. I have to explain this part of it 2 steps forward. I was still crouched down, on all fours, and moved forward, still growling at the thing. When I did that, it stopped. I stood up and kept staring right at it. I never made eye contact with it. Then, it slowly stepped back into the tree line until I couldn't make it out as clearly as before and started to move to the right of me. The deer were still behind me. They were so close, I could have reached out and touched them. I waved my arms and told them to get out of there. When I did that, they went back over the guardrail and took off down the hill. That's when I jumped in my car and got out of there as fast as I could. I felt this thing was trying to circle around me, and I wasn't going to wait around for that. Do I think I'm scared of it? No. But I do think I confused it for a couple of minutes, and that gave me time to move. I told my husband about what had happened up there, but I didn't tell him exactly what I saw. He would think I was nuts, and to be honest, I thought I was a little crazy myself until I saw a picture of a dog. I know there are other things in this world that can't be explained. I've seen them. But this was beyond any of those things. Since this has happened, I can't take that shortcut through that area anymore. My husband took me back over that way once to see the area, and I was begging him to get me out of there the whole time. I thought I was going to throw up. The wildlife up there has almost totally disappeared. I never see anything up on the hills anymore. The street I live on is only about 1 mile or so down the hill from this place, and lately, we have seen coyotes on the streets, like they have been chased out, and pets here have started to go missing. We've also seen a large, black figure moving through our backyards down here. The dogs throughout the neighborhood go crazy regularly now, too. People were calling the cops when we saw that large, black figure jumping fences. I'm concerned that it has come down the hill after eating everything up there. There's a house about a 5-minute walk from mine with the woods all around. A few years ago, before I moved here, there was a fire there. In the house, there was a woman, her parents, and the woman's baby. Everyone survived except the woman, who died in the house. The foundation is all that's left of the house. If you go there, there's all kinds of stuff there, like cutlery, broken CDs, tapes, bits of charred wood, and things like that. One day in the winter, my friend and I decided to go there to check out what kind of things we could find in what was left of the house. It was still a bit light out when we were there, the street lights weren't even on yet. As we were walking around the property, I saw something dark in the corner of my eye. This happens to me a lot, and usually when I look, there's nothing there. This time, however, when I looked, I still saw it. It was a black stick figure with long legs and arms but a short body. It was running away from the house towards the woods. I said, "Did you just see that?" And my friend said, "See what?" At this point, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, so I just said, "Never mind, just my eyes playing tricks on me," and we continued. As we were leaving, we were right in front of where I saw the black thing disappear with the house to the left. Suddenly, my friend yells, "Oh my duck, what was that?" while looking to the left. I have no idea what she's talking about, so I ask. She says, "I just saw a tall black thing running at us, and then it disappeared." It was right there, and she pointed exactly where I had seen it before. My heart dropped, and I got all tingly. I went straight home after that. What I found weird is that I saw it one time when she didn't, and then she saw it when I didn't. Could it be some kind of residual shadow person? This happened to me and, at the time, my best friend from high school. We were in our senior year of high school at the time, during the late 2000s, and our mid-sized suburban school was holding an overnight lock-in as a fun thing for the students to do. Both my friend and I were not super keen on the idea, but some of the other guys from our class were going, so we both reluctantly went. Our circle spent a good part of the lock playing a modified game of tag we called Zombie. We had a good time, but as things were settling down, around 1 a.m. or so, my friend and I both agreed we didn't feel like spending the night at the school. My house was about a 20-minute walk from the school, so we both snuck out of the gym and started walking down the road connecting the high school to the middle school, as that was towards my house. The sports fields were situated between the two schools, and on the left side of the road was a sizable area of forest. As we continued walking down the barely lit road, I don't recall who actually noticed it first, but it wasn't moments before we both stopped dead in our tracks in the middle of the road. Off to the left, about 25 feet from the edge of the woods, we both witnessed something to this day that we can't really explain. In the field, there were somewhere between 1 and 2 dozen figures dancing. I know that there seems to be a big difference between the low end and high end of a guess of 12 to 24, but you'll understand that difference by the time I'm done. These figures were all white and looked like they were wearing white hooded robes. They were dancing in an odd, almost playfully ritualistic way. That's the best way I can decide whether they're circling in and out of each other. You might think we had run into another group of students having a weird lark in the field. But what we were looking at wasn't human. They had the vague shape of humans, but their movements were impossible for humans to make. It's like they were made of jello or some kind of amorphous material. The bodies would almost seem to fold into themselves, bending in to only reform in the shape of a hooded figure. The worst part was how, during their odd dance, some of them seemed to merge together, which made it very hard to get an accurate count of their number. I remember watching a hooded head bend forward towards the thing's stomach and bend up the other way, like they had no spines or forms. My friend and I stood dumbfounded on the road, watching these creatures for a solid 4 or 5 minutes, completely speechless. We only exchanged panicked looks at each other once during that time, as if to say, "You're seeing what I'm seeing, right?" After that time had passed, it felt like the figures noticed us, or maybe they finished their odd dance. Who knows? But they all started moving towards the woods. In a few seconds, the things were gone from our sight, and we were left rather freaked out. It's at this point that I should probably clarify that neither of us had anything to drink or any drugs. We were both dreadfully boring in high school. We both, with fear in our hearts, started down the road again, past those woods where those figures had disappeared. We watched the woods with keen eyes, not sure what we'd do if these things came out again. But we didn't see them again. We continued on to my house, having a damn good time with how fast we were walking. It's obviously been many years since the encounter, but he and I still bring it up from time to time, and we are both at a loss for what we inadvertently stumbled upon that night. In the years 2021 to 2022, I lived in a small town in the south. There's only one main road that cuts through the whole town and small streets that branch out of it. I lived in the only townhouse in a small suburb off the main road. There was a patch of woods across the street from this townhouse I lived in, with a streetlight at the side of said street furthest from the house. My roommate or friend at the time and I would scare each other by telling each other about paranormal things we saw and heard in the townhouse and around the woods at night. We're both spiritual, and my roommate is a medium, so we're both very sensitive to otherworldly things and believe in the supernatural. I was leaving early one morning for something, I don't remember what, but I remember it being really foggy, and I could barely see the tree line in the woods when I stepped out of the house. I had gotten in my car and turned onto the street to head to the main road. Before I drove any further from the house, I looked in the rearview mirror at the streetlight behind me and saw this thing. It looked so tall. My guess is about 8 feet, it was a little less than half the height of the streetlight it stood next to. It was incredibly pale and very skinny. It was naked, and its limbs were abnormally long. Its head didn't look right. It looked misshapen. I couldn't see its face. I stared at it for maybe 5 seconds before doing a double take, and when I did, it was gone. I don't know what I saw, but I know it wasn't human. A few nights later, around the time a full moon was happening, my roommate and I were sitting out on the lawn looking for shooting stars and admiring the beauty of the moon. Our backs were to the woods. It was quiet, except for the part where I could hear something rustling around in the woods behind me, maybe 20 or 30 feet to my right. I shook it off, thinking it was an animal trudging through. My roommate and I continued to look at the night sky and talk about life while this noise behind me continued. Finally, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Without turning to face my roommate, I asked her, "Do you hear that?" "Yes," she said, "just ignore it." "Why? What happens if we don't ignore it?" I asked. As soon as I was finished speaking, the sound I was hearing from my right shifted to the far left in less than a second. Incredibly fast. There was a beat of silence before my roommate replied, "Get up. We're going inside. Don't turn around. Hold my hand." Gripping my roommate's hand, scared and confused, we walked to the porch of the townhouse, went inside, and locked the door. After that night, we refused to go outside at night alone. Hi, this all took place back in 2006, in the summertime, I think around June. It was in Latvia, a small country by the Baltic Sea in northeastern Europe. I was 13 years old at the time, and I and my sister were both members of this archaeology group. In the summers, they would go and do their digs at certain spots. In 2006, it was Rusnica. In a very remote area deep in the Latvian forests, there were about 30 of us in total, and every morning we would make a 3-kilometer journey to the dig site, including a rowboat ride across a lake to get to the site. Over the course of the weeks we were there, we found old bronze rings, a lot of clay from old pottery, and uncovered where there had been old fortifications and other buildings. It was a continuation of their dig from the previous couple of years, and I believe they were still doing it for the next 2 as well. Me and a few of my friends would often goof around while on these digs. We were young boys, so we had a bad attention span for such work. We would wander off into the forest, playing war and pushing over old trees. We stumbled across carved wood spirits in the forest too, which we thought was odd. After getting back to camp, we were told that there was a wasp nest near a swimming area that we were to use, so we were sent to deal with it with some of the older guys. We dealt with them using deodorant and a lighter. Thinking back, these actions may be what caused what was to come. Later that night, I got up in the morning. I don't know what time it was. I needed to pee, so I stepped out of my tent. I slept alone in my tent. The moon was very large and gave off this great, bright glow. As I'm standing there doing my business, I can hear this strange, growing wind that I can't feel, but I can hear it brushing through the treetops, and I started to have the feeling like I'm being watched from the tree line. It was so dark. I figured I was just a little paranoid and went to sleep. The next day, my sister told me that they heard something rustling around mine in their tent that cast a large shadow from the moon over our tents, and my sister was in the tent next to mine, but she was there with 2 other girls. They were all around 16 or 17 at the time. They were freaked out and were up until the next morning. The following night, I started hearing that strange wind again, and I heard, like, in my head, someone say my sister's name, Metra. It was a quiet, raspy, deep, yet feminine voice. After that, I cursed this thing before bed, yelling duck off and stuff like that because I'm an idiot. I guess I put on headphones so I could not hear anything and went to sleep. I remember waking up the next morning feeling very fresh, like I had had the best sleep of my life. Not long after that, my sister and her friends walked up to me looking very concerned, and that told me that they had heard these voices too, saying my name, her name, and other people's names in the camp, and every time they got a little closer and louder. They said that in the night the being had walked up to my tent at the front entrance, and I had opened the flap and started begging for forgiveness, asking it not to hurt me, and making strange weeping noises. Now I don't remember this, but I believe my sister would not lie about this. She said they were too scared to leave their tent. The night after, things got even more intense, and the voices were louder to the point that this voice screamed my name in that raspy voice, like it was right next to me. Freaked out, I ran out to confront whatever it was, thinking maybe this is someone in the camp ducking with me, and in the tree line, I heard that weird wind and saw a very large, dark mass kind of weaving between the tree line, at least 5 meters tall. I ran back in the tent with my sister and her friends, and we all stayed there till the morning with no sleep, individually hearing these voices calling names. Louder and louder, but only the individual would hear it, not all of us at the same time. Weird. The next day, we did a pagan cleansing ritual to ward off evil spirits using kadikis. It's a type of wood, I'm not sure of the English name right now. By burning it and using the smoke around the campsite, it worked. There were other things that happened, but this is getting quite long, so I will wrap it up. I later found out as the word spread through the camp of what had gone on that the year prior, the same thing had happened to one of the seniors of the camp, and he had freaked out at night and run out of his tent crying because of this voice. The dig was on an old pagan graveyard near the ruins too. It was a very strange experience, and I have not heard these types of experiences talked about much, so I decided to share my story here and just have it here as a testimony. I have a memory of what that was like, and maybe someone can help me understand this better, but we believe it was an angry forest spirit. And my sister to this day is scared of tall trees. She told me only last year that she still thinks about it and is scared that it will come to her again someday. She was quite traumatized about this afterwards. But I kind of didn't feel that affected at the time. I started being weird about it after a few years when it kind of sank in, and I wonder what it looked like when it was in front of my tent, and I was begging it not to hurt me. Was I so traumatized by this that even my mind has blocked it out? I don't know. But I want to go back to Rusnica one day and pay it my respects because I feel it taught me a life lesson. About 2 years ago, my boyfriend at the time and I decided to go on a hike right before the sun set. Yes, that sounds dumb, but it's something we've done multiple times before with no issues. There was something about the eeriness of the woods at night that I liked, not so much as my boyfriend thought. To start our hike, we had to go through really tall plants and bushes. We were practically in the middle of nowhere. About a mile into the hike, we came across some abandoned structures and sat down to take a breather. I'm not sure exactly what my boyfriend said to make me do this, but as a joke, I whistled and said, "See," nothing whistled back, "We're alone." Not even 20 seconds after saying that, we heard a whistle. It was a bit far from us, but still too close for our liking. We immediately started booking it in the opposite direction of the whistle and didn't look back. After running for as long as we could, we realized we were lost. We wandered around for about 10 minutes before we stumbled across some train tracks that led back into town about a mile or two down the way. It's important to note that these tracks had thick wood lining both sides. The right side is where we came from. At this point, we were walking because we had run out of energy and felt safe. We were wrong to assume that we were safe. We got to the point where we could see the lights from town, maybe a quarter to half a mile away. Down the tracks a little bit, we could very faintly see the outline of what looked to be a deer coming out of the right side of the woods. It stopped in the middle of the tracks and just stood there. I attempted to shine my flashlight. Note, this flashlight was pretty dim. It was a random one found in the back of the junk drawer, but as soon as I lifted my light up, it fled. Now I say fled because ran would not be an accurate way to describe the way it moved. The best way I can describe it is that it looked like it had 4 broken legs, and its body was very low to the ground, yet it had unbelievable speed. It almost looked like a bent and twisted monster out of a horror movie. I shined my light into the woods to the left of us, as that's where it had ran, and when I did, I saw 2 glowing eyes that looked to be at least 10 feet in the air. My boyfriend said, "What is that?" in a very concerned tone. I told him, "I don't know. Don't look at it, just run." We ran and ran until, eventually, we reached town and walked back home. This happened about 2 years ago, and I've tried to come up with a logical explanation after explaining what I saw that night, and still to this day, I can never find a solid, logical answer other than it being something paranormal. I refused to believe what I had seen for a long time, but I know what I saw, and I know I'm not crazy, as there was another person who witnessed the same thing as me. My boyfriend never spoke of it again and refused to speak about it when I would talk about it. I never went hiking at night after that day. I wanted to share a story about an experience that my mom had when she was a young girl. She's in her 60s now, and as she recalls, she was about 7 years old at the time, so I'm estimating this encounter took place in the mid-1960s. She grew up near Breaux Bridge in South Louisiana, right in the very heart of Cajun country. On this particular night, my grandfather, grandmother, mom, and her 2 younger siblings were out for a drive. They had stopped for a bite to eat and were on their way back home when my grandfather remembered he needed to make a quick stop to pick up something from a coworker. By the time they arrived at the home, it had started raining, so my grandfather told them he wouldn't be long and they should stay in the car while he went inside to chat with his buddy. So there they are sitting in the car with a steady rain falling outside when, out of the corner of her eye, something draws my grandmother's attention. They were parked near an old, twisted oak tree, and there, nestled between the branches, she saw a flickering light. It was small and gave off a yellowish-orange glow. My mom remembers it looking very much like the flame of a candle. Without breaking her gaze, my grandmother excitedly tells the kids to look up at the tree. They all scoot to the left side passenger window, and with their faces pressed up against the glass, they gasp at the sight of the tiny flame floating between the branches. At that moment, a second flame appears from behind a clump of branches. The 2 lights begin to dart around, bobbing, twirling, and bumping into each other as if they were dancing a fast waltz. At some point, the flames must have noticed they were being watched because they began to move closer to them. As the lights reach the car, they really start to put on a show, almost like they were showing off now that they had an audience. The flames continue to fly around, twirling and occasionally bouncing right up against the car window. My mom specifically remembers giggling with her younger siblings, my aunt and uncle, because they thought it was funny that these flames were dancing around, completely unaffected by the rainfall. This whole time, the 2 flames had been dancing closely next to each other, but at some point, the activity slowed and they began to draw apart. When they were about 3 feet apart, they suddenly rushed towards one another and collided in a bright flash. Now a third flame appeared. My mom said she just stared in amazement, trying to figure out exactly what she was looking at. Even at the age of 7, she knew what she was witnessing was something truly amazing. The light show continued for another 2 to 3 minutes, and then, at some point, the playful dancing and twirling stopped. The 3 flames became still, hovering in a straight line a few feet away from the car. Seconds later, they start to move slowly towards each other, eventually merging into a single, larger flame standing roughly 5 to 6 inches tall. It just sat there motionless in midair for a few seconds and then, without warning, shot off at a blinding speed past the old oak and straight into the thickly wooded area that bordered the property. So that's her story. I've heard it told many times over the years, and whether I'm hearing it from my mom or my grandmother, the details haven't changed. Now, admittedly, my grandmother has told me some pretty wild tales, but what makes this particular story special is that my mom was there to witness it and recalls it just as vividly as my grandmother. I have no idea what they witnessed on that rainy Louisiana night. Searching online, the closest thing I've come across is the old European legend of the will-o'-the-wisps. I've done a little research and found that many cultures have folklore that mentions something similar to the wisps. Here in South Louisiana, we have our own version known as the feu-follet or fouet-follet. Our French folklore says the ghostly feu-follet flames, typically associated with mischief, are souls sent back to do some sort of penance to make up for sins they committed while they were still living. A darker side of the legend describes them as the souls of children who passed away before they were baptized and are now stuck in the in-between. I lived in Virginia for a few years with my then girlfriend, Jen. We're both outdoorsy people, so we often explored the area and tried out new places to hike, canoe, etc. Jen was a little obsessed with the idea of someday hiking the Appalachian Trail because she had a couple of friends who raved about it. However, since she was tied down to a rigorous internship, she then got the idea to do an overnight instead, since we lived in close proximity to the trail. When our schedules magically aligned for a few days, she got the idea to do the overnight, and she couldn't be talked out of it. Since we decided to do this on a whim, we were admittedly pretty disorganized in our preparations. It took us a while to get ready, and I was starting to feel rushed because it was late afternoon by the time we got in the car with our bags and the dogs. We still had to drive a ways to get to the closest trailhead, and I worried about it getting dark before we found a spot and got set up. It was not an auspicious beginning. We arrived at the trailhead right before sunset. It was a large gravel parking lot across a small highway from some businesses. To our dismay, there was a guy in a red car right next to ours with the engine running, but he was just sitting there doing nothing. Jen was a little creeped out, so we tried to take our time in the hopes the guy would be on his way. He just sat there doing nothing, not looking at a map, his phone, or us, that I could tell, his car running. We couldn't waste much more time, given that the sun was about to go down, so we shrugged off the creepiness and hit the trail. It was stupid and ridiculous to start out at the time we did, of course. There are many things about this trip that I would do differently, trust me. We hiked for a bit, past a trail shelter with 3 to 4 young guys and girls who seemed very normal and nice, said hi, and a ways down the trail, out of sight of the shelter, we noted a potable water spigot. We got maybe a mile in before I put my foot down and said we needed to make camp. It was near dark and had become difficult to see where the trail led, so we turned back to the campsite we just passed. We could hear the highway traffic in the distance, so the spot wasn't all that peaceful, but we felt good about being near fresh water and also that we were within screaming distance of the other group. We scrambled to make camp. We got the tent up and went on a mad search for firewood in the dark. Oddly, all the wood was wet, like it had rained, but we lived in the vicinity, and it hadn't rained recently. I'm excellent at quickly starting fires, but we struggled for a good hour trying to get a fire started because all of the nearby wood and kindling was wet. Our flashlights started to die during the hunt for dry enough wood, and of course we hadn't thought to bring extra batteries. With only a failing headlamp left and having burned all the TP for lack of other fire starter, we managed to get a fire going and breathed a sigh of relief. We got dinner going, cracked open the Nalgene of wine, and settled in to chill. We ate, cleaned up, and headed into the tent. We fooled around a bit and then headed to sleep. Some time later, I woke up, not to a noise or anything, but to Jen lying awake and very tense next to me. Sensing her alarm, I asked what was going on, but she told me in a freaked out voice to listen. So, I listened. And I heard 2 things for which I still do not have an answer but which set me on high alert. It was exactly that feeling that people describe of sudden internal alarm bells going off and knowing that something is really wrong. First, there was a sound that resembled rocks being dropped from the top of a tree, hitting a bunch of branches on the way down. Thunk. Thunk, thunk. 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 It happened repeatedly. We whispered urgently to each other, trying to rationalize. Maybe it's acorns, I said, praying it was just acorns. The other sound was more alarming. There'd be a period of silence, and then somewhere just beyond the perimeter of our campsite, we'd hear a thick branch go snap. No rustling, no footsteps, no little twigs snapping, and whatever it was had to be big because those had to be quarter-diameter branches by the sound of them. I kept trying to rationalize that it was a wild animal, but I've camped a lot and up. The noise stopped. Once the sky started to lighten and hours had passed, things felt normal again, and it felt safe to go back to bed. We slept for a few hours, and the first thing I did when I got up was to look for acorns. I was really trying to rationalize what had happened, and I felt certain that I'd find oak trees around. Well, you know what? I searched all around our campsite, and there were no oak trees. We'd camped under a bunch of tall evergreens, but I didn't find pine cones or anything else that could be a likely explanation for what we heard. The snapping branches, I'd say, were animals, but why wasn't there any rustling? And if there was an animal around, why didn't either dog react at all? We didn't bother with fixing food because Jen just really wanted to get out of there. We broke down, gathered our gear and trash, and hightailed it out of there. It was such an intensely frightening, weird, and intense experience that it was all we talked about on the way home. Jen mentioned hearing about some Appalachian Trail murders, so the first thing I did when we got home was to get on the computer and start searching. I discovered that in 1986, a lesbian couple had been found murdered while camping on the Ad in Virginia. I then found that another lesbian couple had been murdered on the Appalachian Trail in Virginia in 1996. The year we went camping on the Ad in VA and had all this weird shit happen? 2006. Yes, really. We just looked at each other wide-eyed. Crazy coincidence, probably, but that was the final piece for us regardless. Jen said, I am never going camping on the Appalachian Trail again. Duck that. I was 14 years old and was about to set off to school. Before I left, my mom asked me if I had any weird dreams that night. I told her, no, I didn't, not thinking anything about it, and then went on my way. Fast forward to getting home, my chore was to walk the dog, a large German Shepherd. She was a very calm but protective dog. I set off with the dog down my usual route, which was across the road, into a wooded park area with a river running through the middle. It was a wet autumnal day, with leaves everywhere and the ground sodden. While we were walking through the woods and down the path, we got to the bridge. The bridge is wide enough for 2 people side by side to cross and made of timber, to help you imagine it. My dog starts growling all of a sudden as we start crossing this bridge. I look around to see nobody around and tell her, "Come on, stop being silly." She continues to growl and stops in the middle of the bridge. I look down at her again, and she is looking behind us. As I look up in the direction she is facing, there is a girl standing there, right in my face. Literally, nearly nose to nose. This girl startled me, making me jump. My dog was now barking and growling. I asked this girl if she was okay, but she just stared at me, just staring, with a white, pale gaunt face and curly red hair down to her shoulders. I got nervous, turned, and walked away with my dog still looking behind me, growling. I thought it was strange, as I did not hear this girl approach us on the dead leaves or wooden bridge. What scared me even more was that she continued to follow us. She maintained a distance but continued down the path that we were on. At this point, I was fearing for my life slightly and decided to cut through the wooded/swampy area to my left to reach the exit of the park faster. As I cut through this area, I thought I wouldn't be followed due to the ground. To my horror, we were followed, and this girl continued through the swampy ground toward the exit by dirt road. After driving several miles up, you would come to the top of the mountain, and the road would circle around and end back at where you started, so one way up and one way down. The road itself was wide enough for 1.5 cars, so you would have to pull over some to let an oncoming vehicle pass. I left the cabin by myself in the afternoon and walked down the driveway. I turned left on the road and walked maybe half a mile, then I turned right into the woods and walked down the mountain, no road, to a spot I've hunted before. It was probably 1/4 to half mile down the mountain. Eventually I reached my spot, which had a large number of boulders and deer paths weaving in and around them. I sat there for a while, saw nothing, and decided to head back up. Now, the area I was in was steep. There is no doubt about that, so it would naturally take a lot longer to climb up than to walk down. I was hiking. It seemed to be taking longer than usual, but I thought nothing of it. After another half hour and 45 minutes of walking, however, I started to get nervous. It was getting dark, and surely I should be coming up on the dirt road soon. The sun kept setting, and I kept going, no road. It was dusk now, and I thought there was no way I was down that far that it would take me this long. How the duck did I miss the road? No way did I miss the road. Literally, there is no possible way for me to miss it. It circles around the entire top of the mountain. Now it's dusk, and I decide that maybe I somehow just walked over it. I head back down the mountain for 15 to 30 minutes. Nope. Nothing. At this point, I'm scared. How am I missing this road? I'm getting pissed at myself, trying to rationalize my position, trying to slow down and think this out. So I head back up. It's now dark. I had a flashlight, well, a pen light. It was just enough amber-colored light to see obstacles, so I wouldn't trip and hurt myself. After walking back up for some more time, I sat down. I was alone with a shitty light and had no idea where I was. And that was when I noticed it. The nothing. Nothing was making noise. Nothing was moving. At that point, I decided to go back down the mountain the entire way. There was a small ravine I'd have to climb down and out of, but I thought that was the only way, to walk down out of the mountain and hit civilization. I walked for maybe half hour down, and I came across the dirt road. I was literally shocked. There is no way I missed the road. To this day, I cannot believe that I missed the road. I guess it's possible, but it seems like, based on the amount of time I spent walking, I should have crossed over it more than once. And if I did, again, I should have realized I was on a dirt road. When I was about 9 or 10 years old, my uncle told me a story that has stuck with me ever since. Growing up in Kentucky, I've always heard tales of, Bigfoot or the Poplik Goat Man. The usual run-of-the-mill, urban legend, campfire story. But in the case of the story my uncle had told me, it was different than all the other tall tales I had heard before. Or since. Kentucky is home to the world's largest cave system, Mammoth Cave. Since its founding on July 1, 1941, only about 365 miles have been surveyed by the human eye. It's believed that there are still over 600 miles of passageways and caverns yet to be discovered. The national park is stretched over 3 counties, spanning more than 50,000 acres. Edmonson, Hart, and Barron counties. My uncle has owned land in Edmonson County since the early 1980s. I remember hearing about how, when they were out hunting for deer, they would occasionally come across pits in the ground of various sizes. They were the mouths of cave entrances. They would usually just toss a barrel or a large tree branch into the hole, so no one would stumble across it, fall in, and become trapped. Besides wildlife or just getting lost in the woods, there wasn't really much else you had to worry about. According to most people. This story takes place in the early 1990s, about 5 years after my uncle purchased the land. His closest neighbor, who I'll call Ken, lived about a half-mile down the dirt road that ran parallel to both of their properties. They naturally became good friends over time and, on occasion, would accompany each other hunting. My uncle lived in Louisville and would visit his property when he had off days or needed to do upkeep, like mowing or restocking his pond. So unlike his neighbor Ken, he spent more than most of the year in Louisville. On this particular weekend, Ken went out hunting for deer. Alone. He left his cabin and headed off into the woods, as he had done 100 times before. He followed a path that he had used plenty of times to a small grouping of trees overlooking a large meadow. According to him, it was a perfect sunny fall day, with not many clouds in the sky. He sat in the shadows underneath some low-hanging tree branches, feeling hidden from any prey that might come by. Despite it being the ideal weather for hunting, he didn't see much in terms of game. Just a few fawns and a doe, not the big trophy buck he was hoping for. He had been entertaining the idea of just grabbing his gear and heading back to the cabin. But not wanting to go home empty-handed, he decided to stick around for a little while longer, in hopes his luck would change. His chest fluttered with excitement when he looked across the meadow to the left and saw movement in the tree line opposite him. He pulled his rifle to his shoulder and looked down the scope. The thick trees and foliage at the edge of the tree line prevented him from getting a good view of the animal in his sights. From what he could tell, it was heading towards the edge of the woods. He just had to be patient. When it stepped out of the shadows of the trees about 50 yards away and into the clearing, he knew almost immediately that he wasn't looking at a deer. He tried to keep his rifle from shaking in his hands as he desperately tried to identify exactly what it was he was looking at. He described its body as that of a panther, but the upper torso, where the shoulders and neck were, sat noticeably higher than its lower back and hind legs. He was looking at its side profile, which he claimed while in mid-stride. This thing had to be close to 7 feet in length. He said it was quiet, like a cat. It never made a noise when it moved. The front legs, he said, looked more like arms, significantly longer and skinnier than the hind legs. It had brittle, dark brown hair that started from the back of its head and ran down the length of its back. He also claimed that the creature's skin looked waxy, almost like chimpanzee skin, dark brown, almost black. Its face was long like a dog's, but he said he noticed no ears. He said the corners of its mouth ended by the neck, where the ears should be. The most unsettling detail I can remember of his account, though, was the back legs. He described them as looking frog-like, as in, the back legs were tucked up close to the creature's sides. When it walked, the leading leg would reach almost to the front half of its body, and the other leg would stretch way back, flat like a frog when it crawls. He watched it for about 2 or 3 minutes, slowly and quietly moving through the long, golden grass. A black shadow is surrounded by color. He watched it disappear into the tree line directly across from the woods he had seen it come from initially. After a few moments, he left and headed back to his cabin. Now I don't know how long it was after this incident occurred that Ken told my uncle about it, but he was reluctant to speak on it. He dubbed it the Kentucky Holler Crawler. Eventually, Ken explained the story in full one night while sitting around a fire with my uncle. Ever since then, Ken has refused to go into the woods. He claimed to only hunt on the dirt road running through his property afterward. Both my uncle and Ken have sadly passed away since, but their story has never changed over the years. I even had my uncle retell the story to me a few years ago, just so I knew I had all the details right. Maybe this was just another tall tale used to scare me and my brother when we were kids camping on my uncle's land. But I know one thing for sure, he was an honest man. And his eyes told the truth when he would tell me that story. He had his fair share of unexplainable instances as well. I'm sure anybody would after frequenting a cabin in the middle of nowhere in Kentucky for over 30 years. The thing that keeps me up at night, though, isn't the thought of the creature, it's the thought of where it came from. Who's to say this thing didn't crawl up from the caves that span hundreds of miles in every direction? Hidden from civilization, thriving off the ecosystem? Nothing is impossible when it comes to nature. Nobody really knows for sure what is out there, in the dark. Something whispers my name in the woods. It used to happen now and again. I first remember hearing it when I was just a boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old. I'd been on a stroll through the woods with my mom and her boyfriend, cutting through the park to get to an ice cream shop on the other side of town. "Freddie," the voice said quietly, like a whisper. At the time, I thought it was just my mom's boyfriend, now ex, playing a prank on me. "What?" I asked him. He shrugged. I didn't say anything. The second time it happened, I was 10 years old. My school wasn't far from the forest, and occasionally we'd do our physical education classes out there. This particular time, we were playing capture the flag. I was the flag keeper and exhausted from running, so I found a small spot away from the action to catch my breath. The flag was stuck into my belt on my waist, so I couldn't just grab a breath anywhere. It was easy to steal if somebody was quick or quiet enough. It just so happened that one kid, Ryan, thought he was that quiet. Honestly, I wouldn't have heard of him either. He was nearly on top of me. Freddie. I jumped at the sound of my name, and Ryan lunged for my flag. Before he could reach me, though, I bolted. At the time, I thought that maybe Ryan called my name to rub in his impending victory. Like, aha, Freddie. Got you. Sort of thing. As time wore on, I learned that wasn't the case. The voice called out to me more frequently. When I was in high school, I got a job at a movie theater on the other end of town. The quickest route to get there was, you guessed it, to cut through the forest path. I walked it alone and often. The more I did, the more the voice would whisper my name. Soon, it was whispering my name at least once every time I walked through the woods. Freddie, it would say, and I'd stop and look around. When I wouldn't see anybody, I'd turn and continue on my way. This might sound a little silly, but I sort of got used to it. I guess maybe I just didn't want to think I was losing my mind, so I never told anybody about it. Being the kid who heard voices wasn't exactly a badge of honor in high school. Plus, I like to think that maybe I just had some kind of special connection with the woods. Like some spiritual hippie thing. I was 17 years old when the voice terrified me. I'd been leaving a late shift at the theater, one much later than I'd ever done before, and I had an exam I still needed to study for the next morning. As much as I didn't want to cut through the woods after dark, I didn't have the money for a cab, and the buses had stopped running. So I went through the forest. I'd walked the path 1,000 times before, why should tonight be any different? It was quiet at first. Only the wind and the swaying trees greeted my ears. Now and again I would hear something moving in the brush, but it was always easy enough to dismiss it as a squirrel or raccoon. After all, I was in their territory, they were probably surprised by me. My heart jumped at the sound of my name. Freddie, the voice said. Jesus, I snapped, not expecting it in the dark. I took a deep breath and told myself to relax. It's just you, I mumbled to myself with a chuckle. I walked for a few more minutes when I picked up on the faint sound of footsteps behind me. Was somebody else taking the shortcut? I turned around, peering into the inky darkness of the forest trail. While the moonlight was enough to make out the path directly ahead, it was tough to see much further than 10 or 15 feet. I pulled out my phone and turned on the light, casting it over the trail. Nothing. Just wood chips and a stray candy wrapper. I pocketed my phone, pulled my jacket tighter around me, and continued on. This time I picked up my pace, moving at a fast pace. Freddie, the voice said again, this time less airy and more forceful. I ignored it, continuing on my way. I just wanted to get the hell out of those woods. It's hard to explain, but I'm sure you've felt the same impulse now and again. The sensation that you aren't safe. I felt it in my gut. My body was telling me to leave as quickly as possible. The voice repeated my name, its tone shifting lower, then higher. It sounded unhinged, like an out-of-tune instrument. I'd never heard it repeat my name so often in such a short span of time. Freddie. It sang. Freddie. 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 I broke into a run. Freddie. It screamed, and footsteps thundered behind me. My mind went blank, and my body acted on its own. I ran as hard and as fast as I could. The voice screamed my name over and over again, its footsteps closing in on me. I shouted for help, my voice cracking. Freddie. It shrieked from right behind me. I pulled my phone out and frantically dialed 911. I wasn't sure any longer that I could outrun this thing, whatever it was. I needed help. Desperately. The phone beeped, and I heard somebody answer on the other end. 911, what is your emergency? Before I could say anything, something grabbed my shoulder. I screamed and whipped my hand around, connecting with nothing but air but managing to lose my phone in the process. Leave me alone. I screamed, throwing everything I had into my sprint. My lungs felt like they were on fire, but I knew the alternative of stopping would be far worse. I heaved breath after painful breath. Tears streamed down my face, and my legs burned with exhaustion. I was going to die. I knew it. Then I burst out of the woods. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I didn't stop to look behind me. I kept running until I reached the nearest neighborhood a couple blocks away. That night I took the long way home, sticking to the best lit streets and only those lined with homes. The voice, whatever it was, didn't follow me beyond the tree line. I don't know what it was that was whispering my name for all these years, but I know one thing, I'm never going back into those woods again. I was always a solitary kid growing up. I grew up on the outskirts of the little town that I grew up in, and I never really had any friends. I would hang out with someone here and there, but for the most part, I stuck to myself, even in high school. Because of my voluntary solitude, I found time to invest in hobbies like fishing, hunting, and playing cards. I used to always love a game of spades with my parents and little brother. Though I loved all the hobbies I participated in, hunting was by far and away my favorite. I would hunt all sorts of critters when it was in season and spend hours just to hunt something. See, the fun part of it wasn't the fact that I just killed something, it was the fact that I had outsmarted the animal and beaten it. I now had a trophy to signify my victory, and I thirsted for this sense of victory. Nothing even came close to the euphoria supplied to my brain when I came home with a fresh kill under my belt. I would sometimes spend days out in the wilderness to hunt, and I'd get lost out there, out in nature, with nothing but the sounds of the other creatures that inhabited the woods in which I was choosing to steal life away from. Due to my love for hunting and fishing, I never found time to do much schoolwork. I passed all my classes with at least a C and graduated high school, but further education was not something destined for me. I was convinced hunting was my calling. After high school, I began to hunt not just for pleasure but for work too. There was a company close by to my hometown that made deer jerky and was looking for hunters that could deliver them the meat. Of course, I, the self-proclaimed lover of such activities, applied for this position and, after a week of waiting, got the job. I was to begin right then and there. So, I grabbed my gear, went out to the woods, set up shop in the tree stand I had been using for as long as I can remember, and began to wait. I must have sat in that stand for hours, because soon the sun was beginning to set. It was summer, though, so I knew I had some time before I was shrouded in darkness. That's when I saw him. A male buck pranced into view all the way on the horizon. I sat there watching it, mesmerized by how it moved. It calmly paced the forest floor, bending over here and there to eat some grass or berries, until finally it came to the creek that I had set my stand up near. It stood for a moment, looked around, and dropped its head to take a much-needed sip of water. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I raised my rifle, knowing I had only one shot, and aimed it directly behind his front shoulder. I took a deep breath. Bang! My shot was perfect. It traveled directly through the buck's heart and killed him on the spot. My heart swelled as I realized I'd won again. All this waiting was not in vain. I nearly flew down the steps to my stand and rushed over to the buck. His eyes were still open. I was glad it was instant, so that he wouldn't have to suffer. I picked him up, and soon I was back home. I called the company, and soon they had someone come over to my house and pick up my latest kill. I thanked the man as he left and shut my door, feeling prouder than ever. I knew that this was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. A few years passed and I continued doing what I loved, and eventually I received enough money from hunting that I moved away from my hometown and moved to West Virginia, as I heard that the hunting there was great. I wanted to live out in the back country, as I wanted to be able to hunt all the time, and I found a place where I could do just that. There was an old cabin, not too expensive, that sat right in the woods. Not too far away from a town, maybe a 15 or 20 minute drive, so not completely isolated, but the town it's close to is not exactly bustling, so it's not urban either. I liked it very much, and I made a couple of friends in town. Most liked hunting, but only one ever wanted to come with me to hunt. His name is Brian. Brian's a good guy and a young one too. He's just about my age, give or take a few years older, but we get along well, and we've gone hunting multiple times. The only difference between us is that he's got a full family. Wife, kids, the works. Even has a golden retriever. He's a lucky guy, I'll tell you what. Good shot, too. I'm glad he's my partner. I had set up my tree stand maybe a week after buying the cabin out in the woods, and maybe a month after that is when Brian and I first went hunting together. We sat up in that stand for hours, waiting for something to turn up. Eventually a doe showed up, and we did our thing and carried her back to my cabin. At this point, I had learned enough about the making of jerky to know how to do it myself, and with the help of Brian, we skinned the doe and began making jerky and venison steaks. That was a good night. We would go hunting maybe once or twice every 2 weeks, but I would go hunting almost every night. At this point, I had found another company somewhat close by, maybe an hour away, that again needed hunters to gather meat and send it in to them, so once again I applied and got the job. Everything seemed to be going well, I was good at my job, and it paid well. Because I was up in that tree stand for so long, almost every night, I knew just about every sound in the woods, from the elk yells to mountain lion screams to foxes and coyotes. If you gave me a noise out in those woods, I could tell you exactly what animal it was and sometimes which gender it was. That's what made this certain night so different. Like usual, I was up in my seat, and I heard a scream. I played it off like it was nothing, because it probably was nothing. Except this scream was different. It sounded similar to something I've heard before, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Brian was with me, and he couldn't figure it out either. Usually we don't really care about these noises, as it's not exactly our business to worry about every little sound we hear in the woods at night. However, this noise was just wrong. Something was not right with this scream, and after a good 10 minutes of sitting through it and thinking through every animal it could be, Brian and I decided that we would go check it out. After all, we were armed and both good shots, and if it was a mountain lion, we figured it would run away if it heard us coming. We got down from the stand and began our walk in the direction of the scream. After a minute or two, we could tell we were getting closer because the noise was getting louder. It seemed almost to echo through the trees, and I won't lie when I say it freaked us both out a little. However, we trudged onward, and eventually, after another minute of hiking, we stumbled upon a clearing where we saw where the noise was emanating from. It was a huge elk, standing in the middle of the clearing, just screaming out into the night. We looked at each other, and through the relieved look on Brian's face, I could tell he still shared the same uneasiness that I was feeling. We turned to look at the huge elk, still wailing, and, deciding to let it be, walked all the way back to the stand. After some back and forth, we decided it would be in our best interest to call it a night and just go home. When we hunted at night, Brian usually stayed in the guest room in my cabin, as it was usually late when we got done, 2 or 3 in the morning, and he didn't want to wake his children or wife up coming home. So he crashed at my place. However, even though we were far away from the elk, it seemed as though it had followed us and was just as loud as ever. This freaked us both out a little bit, but we figured if we went to sleep, it would all be over in the morning. So we did. But it wasn't the ending. When we woke up, the scream had disappeared. We were relieved, and Brian said goodbye and left for his home. I did my normal routine, went into town, and waited until dusk before going back out into the woods and into my stand. I was still a tad unnerved from last night, but I figured this would help me get my mind off of it, and it did. Until around midnight, I heard a scream again. This time, however, the scream really sounded wrong. Like, really wrong. I could tell this was not the same scream from last night, but it again was not an animal I could put my finger on. I hoped and prayed it would go away, but it didn't. The screaming persisted and persisted until I couldn't take it anymore. I had to find out what the hell was screaming in the dead of night. I set out in the same direction as last night, expecting the worst to be awaiting me. I trudged and trudged through the underbrush, until finally I reached the clearing from the night prior, where the scream had reached its peak. What I saw, however, shook me to my core. There was nothing this time, like I had expected. No, there was a figure standing in the middle of the clearing, facing away from me. I froze, unable to comprehend what I was witnessing. This thing was massive, at least 8 feet tall, and I couldn't tell if it was human or something else. I'll admit it, I was terrified. I had never seen something like this before, and I was ready to book it away from there. I didn't want whatever this thing was to see me though, so I backpedaled, as slowly as I could, staring at this thing for as long as it was in view. As soon as it was just on the horizon, it stopped screaming. Again, I froze. Why'd it stop? I wondered. I stood there in the trees, dumbfounded, staring at this 8-foot-tall creature that had just been wailing in the middle of the woods. I realize now what a fatal mistake I made by not running home as soon as I saw this thing. As I stood there, this thing turned around, and my body was struck with fear. Though I was at least 300 yards away from this thing, it stared directly at me, and I knew it knew I was there. Its yellow eyes pierced daggers into my heart as it got down on all fours and began wailing once more, starting to gallop towards me. I stood there frozen for another moment before booking it. I knew all the shortcuts to my house, and I took them all, knowing I may not have much time left. I sprinted faster than I have ever sprinted, hearing its echoing cries in the distance, its growing intensity only proving I was going too slowly. As the sound grew louder than ever, I saw my house. I fumbled with my keys to get to the one that opened my front door, and as I reached the porch, I found it. I unlocked the door and shut it as soon as I reached it. The cries were right outside, and I knew whatever this thing was, it was on my porch, searching for a way to get inside. Terrified, I hid in my freezer, where I hoped the smell of meat and ice would help mask my scent to the being. This is where I've been hiding for the last 2 hours. The creature has now found its way inside my house, and I can hear it moving around upstairs, tracking any signs of me. I am in the basement and in the cooler, so hopefully it won't find me in here. I tried texting Brian to get over to my place, but my messages haven't been going through, and given it's 3 in the morning, I doubt he'd see them anyway. I have no idea if this thing will go away in the morning, but right now it's my only hope that I have. If it doesn't, then it will find me eventually, and who knows what it will do then. If you're seeing this, please, I'm begging you, please heed my advice. If you hear screaming in the middle of the woods at night, do not investigate.